Welcome back. Hello, Bruce.
Andy, how you doing?
Great.
I'm bringing the heat tonight.
Thank you. I am exhausted. That's it. But, I got my little cat Frankie here, and you know what? I think he's in for a little surprise for this episode.
I think so.
Let's get right into it.
You bet.
Hello, and welcome to Temple of the False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I am Groot. No, Bruce. Sorry.
Oh, thought we had a special guest today, but welcome to this episode 53.
Mm-hmm. 50.
It is definitively 53.
All right.
Which means it's time for a deck tale.
Particularly appropriate for this deck.
Yeah, with trying to keep our season in order, we decided to choose a 60 card deck because I find Bruce's 60 card decks fascinating. They've got a little bit of commander flair in terms of personal. What's the word? Flair.
Sounds good.
They feel creative in ways that deck building should feel. They are generally honed toward a multiplayer experience and do some crazy commander-like things.
Yeah, it's very easy to play a casual 60 card deck and just build it to a combo. Or, because you got 4 copies and you can just be like, okay, this is the combo. I need to do this. And when I do this, I can win the game. So I'm going to do that. And that just is fun a couple of times. And then it starts to get boring. So I've tried not to do that. And I come from an era where I didn't have enough cards to build a combo anyway. I never had 4 copies of something. So it was always, my decks were always what I like to term miniature versions of, a current low-powered commander deck. It was a bunch of one-offs that had a sort of a theme, but and then you just played it.
Yeah, and so like this deck in particular, I love and always come back to when I think about 60 card decks because it sticks very close to that theme. It does things not necessarily underpowered. Like I would think that I personally think that this deck is finely tuned specifically for our meta, but I've rarely seen this deck win the same way twice. It generally has it has flexible pieces, and it uses those to the best ability it can. It's for those wondering, I guess I'll just the cat's out of the bag. It's a green-white deck based around the card Hungry Lynx. Hungry Lynx, for those who don't know, is 1 and a green creature, cat. Yeah.
That's right, Frankie. Nice timing.
Yeah, my God. He's a 2/2. He says, cats you control have protection from rats. At the beginning of your end step, target opponent creates a 1/1 black rat creature token with Death Touch. Whenever a rat dies, put a +1/+1 counter on each cat you control. So this is lovingly dubbed your cat rat deck.
Yes.
Yeah. What inspired you to go for specifically this card?
Okay, this was a card I got to preview. I shouldn't say me. I got to preview it. I'm sure it was with a group of other TCG player writers. There was a video. There was other stuff done. And I was very interested in the card. And in fact, the good folks at TCG Player were good enough to do a spoof on Dr. Seuss, and we called it Cat with a Rat. The article is worth checking out. I'll make sure that we've got it posted in the link, just because I follow along with the Dr. Seuss rhyming scheme for probably a little longer than I should have. But in any event, I built it when I was looking at it there. I looked at it, and I mean, sure, we were looking at it from a commander perspective, and then I thought, 4 of these could do some nasty work, because if you can get 2 of them out at the same time and then kill 1 rat, all of your cats are getting 2 +1/+1 counters because they get 1 from each. And I thought, there's got to be something here. There's just got to. And I started looking at stuff, and initially I started with green-black because I was looking at Pestilence, thinking, yeah, I can get 4 or 5 rats out there, and then Pestilence for 1, it kills all the rats. My cats will get huge from all the dead rats, and then I can just hammer my way in, and it would be an interesting setup. And it was cute, but I ended up going in a different way and trying something a little bit different, with the idea that the initial focus of this deck was find ways to do a point of damage to a rat, and then my cats would get a little bigger, and you could make that work. And I think ideally what I was looking for were just big cats. I just wanted to swing in with large cats. That's where the serrated arrows comes in, and also the Thank You, which is there because I don't have 4 serrated arrows. But because Thank You is just a lousy card, but it does exactly what I want it to do. It just takes a long time to do it. So
yeah.
But that was the original idea for the deck, is give out rats, ping a rat with either the arrows or Thank You. Your cats get a little bigger, and then you just overwhelm with combat damage. That was the initial idea of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I started putting other stuff together, and that's when other things started to fall into place, because I used Nakata War Pride, because, hey, cats, and then there'll be lots of them, because, you'll make all these cats, and I thought that would be great. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to make all these cats, what would also be good? If I were to use Ashnod's Altar, because then I could sacrifice all of these token cats that don't stick around for very long and get all this mana, and I could cast more spells, and that would be great. Unfortunately, it turns out I didn't happen to have any Ashnod's Altars left that weren't already in decks.
And at, $10 a card, it's, adds up.
Right. So,
and and then also, I mean, beyond that, like, if you look at the curve of this deck, it's fairly low. So like, at some point it's like, what are you going to do with all that mana? Especially if you're creating these tokens turn after turn.
Right. And my thought was White Sun Zenith, but realistically, there's 3 of them in the deck. And if you're using the altar, then how are you, how does that work? Because you need to be able to do this repeatedly, and you're talking every turn, and you're rarely ever going to have more than 2 of White Sun Zenith in your hand. So yeah. So instead, I went with Altar of Dementia, and by sheer fluke discovered a whole new weird level for this deck. So
Altar of Dementia, for those who don't know, it's a 2-mana artifact similar to most altars. Sack outlet, free sack outlet. Sacrifice creature. Target player puts a number of cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power from the top of their library into their graveyard. So essentially, sack a creature, look at the power, they mill that many. Which, very great, as you'll see later in this episode, where we talk about the crazy things that this deck does.
Right.
I appreciate you look at this curve, like I was saying, it fairly tops out at 4, and that's like, you've got 5 4-cost cards.
Yeah.
And above that, like, sure, you have a couple, but like, they're not the necessary pieces that make this engine go.
No.
You've got Mirari's Wake at 5, but like, that, buffs your creatures, which is great. It's exactly what green-white wants, and it produces more mana, which is also great, which is exactly what green-white wants. But it's interesting, too, because I've seen this deck played many times, and there are cards in this deck that I have still yet to see.
Which cards haven't you seen?
I don't think I've ever seen Nazan played.
Okay.
Nazan Revered
that makes
Bladesmith
sense.
is 4 green white, 5/4. When it enters the battlefield, tutor for an equipment. If it's the Hammer of Nazan, you can reveal it and put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, you put the equipment into your hand, and then you shuffle. And whenever an equipped creature you control attacks, you may tap target creature defending player controls, which super helpful, but not necessarily like pinpointed the goal of this deck,
right?
But it is just more value to kind of help along the rest of the deck,
right? I mean, Nazan is there to search out for Blade of Selves or Helm of the Host, because for a long time I felt like these were a couple of the key cards in the deck, because they could make copies of a card, and ideally they would make copies of your Hungry Lynx or copies of Nakata Warpride, and then all sorts of craziness ensues at that point. So because there's nothing like having Nakata Warpride swing at all of your opponents as opposed to just one of them, and then getting that many more tokens. Bats.
So I'm not gonna read the card word for word, but Nakata Warpride is a very significant part of this deck where you attack. Correct me if I veer off at all.
No.
You attack an opponent before blocks are declared. You count every single one of their creatures. You make that many copies of Nakata Warpride.
Yes.
+1. Or no, you make
that
many copies.
Because then you have one extra.
Right. So you have one more creature. Ideal, like if this was the only thing you have one more creature than they had. So at least one will be getting through. At the end of combat, all the copies will, or no, at the end of the turn, you exile the tokens.
Now, a key part with the Nakata Warpride is that it must be blocked by exactly one creature if able. So if all of their creatures,
that is important.
So if all their creatures are untapped, every one of those creatures has to block one Nakata Warpride. Now, the Warpride is a 3/3. All the tokens that you make are all 3/3s. So, yeah, a bunch of them are probably going to die. But a lot of them are going to kill off your opponent's creatures. So then they're left, if they want to keep their creature alive, maybe they want to tap it. Okay, then they tap it. Well, it means that there's one more of your cat warriors that's going to get through and do damage. And as we'll see, they're not going to be 3/3s. That's not how this deck works.
I have a question for you for general interaction. Kasali Pride Mage has Exalted.
Yes.
Say you attack with just the Nakata Warpride. So obviously it triggers, it's a 4/4. Whenever a creature, Exalted says whenever a creature you control attacks alone, that creature gets a +1/+1 until end of turn. So you can stack the triggers so that it becomes a 4/4 before you make the copies. When you make the copies, are those copies 4/4s?
I have no idea. To be honest, the Kasali Pride Mage, this deck is never, unless it's the first 2 turns of the game, this deck is not going to swing, it's not designed to swing with one cat.
Right.
I mean, Skyhunter Patrol is there, Skyhunter Skirmisher are there, mostly because I wanted some flying creatures, and every once in a while, maybe they'll get the Exalted bonus. But realistically, the Pride Mages are in there because you can sack them to destroy an artifact or enchantment.
Yeah,
and
I really
it also
appreciate
means a cat dies.
Yeah, exactly. I really appreciate the sticking to the theme here. I mean, you've got these cat creatures that I've seen solely in this deck. Kasali Slingers, for instance. Whenever it or another cat enters a battlefield under your control, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. That's essentially Aura Shards on a cat. And it's very interesting. I mean, obviously, Hankyu and Serrated Arrows are fine.
Hankyu and Serrated Arrows are there to get things started, if needed.
I just love how much it is so specific to the theme.
Yeah.
Even to the point of the the removal is stapled onto a cat. But you said earlier, earlier it was like a minute ago.
Yeah.
The Pride Mage, it triggers something, right? Like you said, it's another cat that dies. But
right.
if you'll notice,
the Lynx doesn't
is
say...
when it's when a rat dies.
Right. So
which
now the cats all have protection from rats. So the idea is that in a one-on-one game, you're going to swing at your opponent, and at some point, or they're going to essentially those rats, they can't block, and if they swing at you, you can block the rat. You don't take any damage, even in spite of the fact that they're death touch. So essentially, those rats are completely null and void against you. In fact, but against the other opponents, it's a 1/1 death touch. So if you give it to an opponent, one, there's an element of politics there. It's like, here, I'm going to help you out. It's a 1/1 death touch, which means no one's going to swing at you on the ground, because who wants to lose their creature? And my attitude is, you know what, if somebody does swing at you and you want to use that rat, you go right ahead. Because then my cats get bigger, and I'll happily give you another one. So there's a benefit there. But realistically, we're slow rolling the deck on this one point. The other card that's in here is Shields of Velasvel. Now, Shields of Velasvel is it's an instant. It's a tribal instant shapeshifter, and it has changeling, so it is all creature types. So, in fact, it is also a cat. That's really not relevant. However, it says creatures target player controls get +0/+1 and gain all creature types until the end of the turn. So, when I first built the deck, I put this in here because I'm like, this is great. Before my attack, I hit my opponent with this. All your creatures are rats, which means I have protection from rats because all my creatures are cats. So then I swing in and you can't block and you have to take all the damage. And I thought, how awesome is this? This is going to be great. I'll put this in here. I'll run this, I'll run this all the time. It'll be wonderful. And then on one of the games, I had a mirror entity out.
And mirror entity, says has an activated ability of X until end of turn. Creatures you control have base power and toughness XX and gain all creature types. So you put this as 1, and everything becomes cats, rats, dogs, warriors,
everything,
etc. Yeah.
So my thought of obviously with mirror entity was great. It ups the base power and toughness. So if my cats all have 3+1/+1 counters on it, they're 5/5s because most of the cats are 2/2s. Well, then with mirror entity out, I'll take the 5 or 6 mana I have on the table, tap it all, put it into mirror entity, and now suddenly they're all base 5/5 or base 6/6 plus all those counters. And I thought, how amazing is this going to be? And then and then you go to swing at somebody, and I've got all these cat rats. Well, I swung, and then somebody blocked one of my cards, and I thought, well, if it's going to die anyway, I can just sack it to the Altar of Dementia. And then they're going to have to mill, at the time it was 6 cards. Great, they milled 6 cards. And then it was like, oh wait, but that wasn't just a cat that died, it was also a rat that died. So now all of my other creatures got a +1/+1 counter. And then I'm looking at the
From
math.
the Hungry Lynx, yeah.
From the Hungry Lynx. And then I'm looking at the math again, and now I'm like, wow, okay. Now suddenly a bunch of my creatures that I thought were going to die aren't dying. Great. And then I sacked another one. And they all got another +1/+1 counter. And that opponent then milled 7 cards instead of 6. And then the combat was finished. And I've got all these creatures that are pretty sizable, but they're all still rats. And I thought, every time I sack one of these, all my other cat rats are going to get bigger. Which means I can then...
Just all of your creatures are going to get slightly bigger because they're all cats, they're all rats.
Right, so basically what ends up happening is with Altar of Dementia and a Hungry Lynx out and the Shields of Velasvel to make all of your creatures cat rats, when you swing in, you sack one of them and mill somebody for that amount. All your other cards get a plus and plus one counter. Then you mill another, then you sack another one because it's now bigger than it was before. And all of the other cats get a little bigger. So in the end, if you're swinging with 6/2/2 cats, you mill the first one, person mills 2, and all your other cats become 3/3s. The next one you're milling 3, the next one you're milling 4, the next one you're milling 5, and it goes up from there. And this can all be done after combat.
Oh yeah.
So
especially with the Nakatl War Pride,
right,
where you're losing the tokens anyway. Might as well and the thing is if you don't sacrifice them, they get exiled. So then it won't trigger the death. It'll just you'll need to have that sack outlet for sure.
Right. So Nakatl War Pride makes a bunch of 3/3 cats. So if I have 3 opponents, well, actually that's not fair because then that involves a whole nother card. But if I swing the War Pride at an opponent who has 5 cards or 5 creatures, I get 5 3/3 cats. Now, if they're all cat rats, I mean, I swing in any one of them that's going to get blocked and not do damage to the opponent's face. I'll sacrifice that one, but I do it one at a time. After blockers have been declared, sack those ones down because it makes all the other cats that get through bigger.
Yeah.
Then do the damage. After the damage is dealt, then take all of the cats that were going to die, the ones that you made with the War Pride, sack all of them to the Altar Dementia, one at a time, because all your other cats are getting bigger every time. And you're not going after the person you just did, 13 damage to. You're going after the other guy who's sitting there at, 65 life because no one's been able to get through. And now you're hitting him for milling 5 cards, 6 cards, 7 cards, 8 cards. It doesn't.
It adds up to 60 real fast.
It really doesn't take long. It really doesn't. And when you recognize that this could very well be the kill move, you can just sack out your creatures. Just wipe your board clean and do ridiculous amounts of damage. So, when you can cause ridiculous amounts of milling to mill them out. And we are talking about 60 card decks here, not 100 card decks. So
right.
It makes it just that much easier.
I love it too because it's you're going to be milling, like you said, you're going to be milling a different person than you're doing damage to, because if you're doing both to the same person, it doesn't really make much sense.
You're doubling up for no reason.
But then you add in things like Blade of Selves, where you go to combat, you attack with, say, like the Blade of Selves on the Nakatl War Pride.
Yeah.
You make a copy for each person, and then you make a copy of it for each creature, and then there is that moment, and we've seen it on game nights and whatever, of that moment between after damage is done and then before the end of combat, where you can, because Blade of Selves it exiles at the end of combat. Really, it's just those 2 first copies that are exiled at the end of combat, but you can sack those at that point, and it just gets wild. It's just so many numbers that I love it because it's just nobody loves being milled out, but it is such a specific, I've seen this happen so many times.
Yeah. This isn't your traditional mill deck. A mill deck hits you and hits you and hits you and hits you, or then starts a trickle. So you're always losing a couple of cards out of your library.
Right.
And then, it has a way to do a big chunk, and then it goes from there. This deck, it's all at once. And, a lot of times, if I can swing at somebody twice, somebody else is now dead because I've milled them out. It's just, it takes that little amount of effort.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of my favorite things too, and maybe we'll talk about this after the break, is that I've seen this deck probably win more from combat than from actually milling. You'll mill maybe a person out if you're lucky. But once this starts going, it is hard to stop, and people start focusing on it, and then
and it's interesting because like you mentioned about the flexibility. I mean, you talk about Blade of Selves and Nakata War Pride, but you can put Blade of Selves on Nazan, and suddenly you're allowed to go and find 2 pieces of equipment. So you can go find the Helm of the Host and maybe Hankyu, or whatever other equipment you're looking for, or a hammer. Now, sure, you're going to lose both of those legends immediately, but they still come in and search. So you get that. You can use it on the Hungry Lynx itself. So, you swing, make 3 copies of the Hungry Lynx. Well, now every time you sack a cat rat, all of your creatures get 3 +1/+1 counters, and eventually you're going to sack those 2 Hungry Lynxes because they're just copies that are going to be exiled. So that's 2 more cat activations. So
and with that in mind too, like because they're token copies, you're not as vulnerable to board wipes. I mean, like, you are vulnerable, but like you can still build up. If like, I remember reading your article, one of your articles. You have 2 about this deck, or at least about this card. And one of them was talking about how you want to make sure you don't always put as many Hungry Lynx onto the board as possible, because if you come across a board wipe, there's not much reanimation in this deck.
No,
if at all.
There is none.
And so, like, you want to be careful that if you are just making token copies, then great. Like, it doesn't, like, then you get the value without the issue of losing the game. But let's quickly turn it over to break. We'll be back with cool things about this deck, what we want to take out, what we want to put in, some ideas on how to kind of change it. So we'll be right back. This episode of Temple of the False Pod is brought to you by tokens. Whether you're denoting it with a card, or a piece of paper, or a little toy, tokens are a vital importance on your play experience. Here at Temple of the False Pod, we promote all tokens all the time. Tokens, they're little playthings. Tokens. And now back to you. Wow, that was a commercial.
It was a token gesture.
Welcome back. We are talking about Bruce's 60-card Cat Rat deck here on our very special episode of Deck Tales. Where were we? We were talking about how great this deck is. Honestly, I honestly cannot stress enough how much this deck is like the cornerstone to which I look at like how to build casual decks, because like it really leans into that theme aspect of like not being super serious, like not taking itself seriously, but still being somewhat like it can hold its weight. Like it really, I rarely see this deck not do its thing.
There's a lot of times when this deck, this is one of those decks that looks like, or that can be doing nothing.
Right.
And then, you get the right card in place, and then all of a sudden it's going. Yeah. And then everybody's like, where did that come from? And you just get this, this ridiculous turn, and suddenly you're, right on the edge of pushing the game state and making things happen. And then a couple of cards later, you're back on the sidelines again, trying to make something work, but it's still there, and everybody knows it, that there comes a point where it can, you can rebound. Because like you said, there's so many different angles. Like, I mean, I will have if I've got the setup with Nakata War Pride, you go with that. and then I draw White Sun Zenith. Well, okay, that would make things even more ridiculous than they already are. But
especially if you have things like your ramp out, like your Mirari's Wake, or
exactly. However, you just sit on it.
Yeah,
because somebody's going to play mass removal and take out all your cat rats, and then you're going to be like, ugh, now I've got nothing. Well, no, you don't. You have White Sun Zenith in hand. So then at the end of the last person's turn before yours, you play White Sun Zenith for as much as you can, put out all those cats, and then on your turn, then go from there. Maybe at that point you're just a standard white weenie deck with 7 2/2 white cats, and you're just going to swing in for damage. Then fine, you can play that angle. It's not like this has to be milling. It's not like this has to be, like the Hungry Lynx has to be there so you can get your cats bigger. You just work it all around the table and use what you've got. And
it's a very flexible puzzle of whatever you draw is probably going to help, minus a few things that we'll talk about later. But I mean, there's a reason that Hungry Lynx is the only 4 of in this deck, and I think as long as you have that out, like every turn you'll be at least advancing the board. Even if you don't do anything, at the end of your turn you will be advancing the board by not only creating more creatures across the table, because you'll be handing people rats, but you'll be directing you'll be directing threat assessment. People either start looking at you because you're handing out Death Touchers, or people start looking at like the person who's getting all the Death Touchers, or you're really helping out the table by giving the Death Touchers to not the person who's like the biggest threat.
Right.
Like it is significantly advancing the game by just being there.
And to me, the Hungry Lynx and handing out these Death Touch rats, that's a game within a game for me, because the first one, well, you can look around the board and decide who do you think should get it. But what happens with the next one? Do you start spreading them around? Because I will tell you, if you spread them around to everybody, then suddenly nobody's swinging on the ground. And is that what you want with your deck? And a lot of times I would say no, that's not what you want. You want opponents to be doing damage to each other. So quite often I will pick somebody and give them all of the rats, no matter how many come out, just because it makes more sense that way. Now, to be fair, that did bite me in the butt the last time we played this, because I ended up having it turns out for when you've got a bunch of cats who have protection from rats, that's great when they're 1/1 Death Touchers, but when they're 4/4 Death Touchers with trample, suddenly your protection from rat is not that helpful. So.
Yeah, and obviously once there's like a critical mass, when they have more Death Touchers than you do have creatures, then like they'll be getting through. But also like if you really put all your eggs in that one basket of giving one person all of them, it really shows like for instance, that game you're talking about, it was 3 of us.
Yeah.
I was the bigger threat, so you gave our opponent all of the rats. You'll also notice some people have the tendency to just sit on them because they are blockers.
Yeah.
They won't come for you because you're giving them rats. And, you have general protection from rats.
Right. I mean, that's if somebody with a rat is actually attacking you with that rat, then they're doing you a favor.
Yeah.
Because they're giving all of your cats a +1/+1 counter. You just block, and then your cats all get big. So, there are going to be board states when that makes sense. When you when I can convince an opponent, look, I'm going to give you a rat. Can you swing at me so my cats can be bigger? So the next time I swing at somebody else, I'll do even more damage. But
and it starts to backfire a little when the opponent does just end up sitting on them. But like even then, like great. Then you're getting value for no downside. Because if they're not attacking with them, they're not dying. Basically, you're giving out nothing, which is good.
Yeah, the downside of handing the rat over to an opponent is you're giving them a 1/1 creature with death touch, and you don't want to give them anything.
Right.
The whole idea is that you're supposed to be finding a way to get rid of that 1/1 death touch so that your cats can get bigger. So it's it can be seen as a downside, but for the most part, it rarely is for me. Just because when it's time to do the big swing, you swing. A lot of times you can just swing at the person who has the death touch rat. It can't block anyway, so you can do the damage to them and work something else out.
Yeah, it's it's funny because it's literally just like one line on this card is cats you control have protection from rats.
Yeah.
But it is so multifaceted in terms of attacking, defending, like simple like turn-to-turn politics. It's great. All stapled onto a bear, essentially.
Yes.
And I think this is kind of where the mirror entity is also multifaceted in terms of attacking and obviously what we were talking about earlier in the mill strategy. But like you can activate mirror entity literally whenever.
Yes.
And it's excellent in that aspect because you can activate it after blockers are declared. So if you want to kill whatever blocked or whatever they're blocking with, or if you just do the math quickly and figure out like, oh, my unblocked creatures can just kill them, then you do that. It's an excellent. I mean, it's essentially a combat trick, but like because it's on a creature, it's not coming out of nowhere. It's harder to counter. You're just activating an ability,
and it's awkward for an opponent to deal with. Just assuming those 4/2/2 cats, those swing in and mirror entity is not attacking; it's just sitting there. Well, how big are those cats going to get? Because they can, it depends on how much you can spend on the mirror entity, and then if you have a way to give them the +1 counters. So if you have that hungry Lynx and the Altar of Dementia, or you have some way to sacrifice one of these cats, well, it's very hard to take those 4 cats, and now your opponent is sitting there looking at it with his 2 creatures, trying to decide which, how to block. Well, okay, I blocked 2 of them. Well, now now they've got to figure, okay, well, are those 2 creatures going to get sacrificed? And if they are, how many more +1/+1 counters? You're going to get at least 2 more. And am I going to get milled on top of this, or is somebody else getting milled? And it just, the combat starts getting awkward to figure out, and it becomes very, and that's with a basic combat where we're talking about 4/2/2 creatures. And that's not that isn't necessarily how this deck works. It's just you get a whole bunch of different weird stuff, and you've got +1/+1 counters from some creatures who've been out there longer and some that haven't been out as long, and so you've got to try and figure out who you're blocking. Like, are you trying to block to kill it, or are you trying to block to prevent the damage? Because the odds are that creature either isn't going to be there, or it's going to be much bigger than you think it's going to be.
Yeah, I think the cool thing too is that, like, say all of your creatures have +1/+1 counters except for 1. If you activate Mirror Entity for 0, they all turn into rats, and then that 1 without the counter dies. So it's like you don't need a lot of mana for this to be significant, because once that rat dies, everything else gets more +1/+1 counters. Granted, if you have a way to pump them up, then better. But it does give you somewhat of a sack outlet if need be.
Yeah.
And I'm honestly surprised that there's only 2 in this deck, but I get it.
I think that's a product of I had to.
Only having to, yeah.
Yeah.
I get that as well.
A number of the cards, like when I built the deck, it was built around the cards that I had. So while it runs nicely, I will say like Sky Hunter Patrol or Sky Hunter Skirmisher, I'm confident I could probably find better flying cats.
Yeah.
And go out and buy them. But I haven't. So
yeah,
it's just, I put the deck together. I've run it. It's fun. I will make some changes at some point. But, for the longest time, I wanted to play it out a few times just to see how it's going to go. And now that I have, you get lazy.
It's made some wacky interactions for sure.
It definitely
and
has.
I love that not a single creature in this deck is not a cat.
Yes.
Yeah, we've talked about plenty of our favorite cards in this deck.
Yeah.
I think we have to knock this deck down a few pegs, or at least look toward the future of what this deck could be, especially since, if you had built the deck back in 2019, it's been, a number of years since then. There's definitely upgrades that can be done.
Yes.
But to do that, you'd need to take cards out. What are we looking at here?
All right, so I think the two most obvious cards are Hank You. I've got 2 copies of it there. Sure, it only costs 1 to play, but it's 4 to equip, and then you have to tap a creature to put a counter on it, and then you can tap the creature again to remove the counter and do that much damage. So if you've got 12 turns, boy, this could be ugly. But who does? And you're only trying to kill a rat. So you're going to spend 1 mana, and then 4, and then tap a creature, and then tap that same creature again to actually do 1 point of damage. That's nuts. This is garbage. This card should come out. It got put in there because I wanted four ways to do a point of damage to my opposing creatures.
Yeah.
Obviously, this has just got to go.
Yeah.
The other one is a bit of a surprise. I would dump Nazan and Hammer of Nazan. The number of times I've needed to search for an equipment, it just doesn't happen because you're not really ever searching for Hank You. And even replacing Hank You with Viridian Longbow, I'm not going to use.
Right.
I don't need a 6 mana tutor to find an equipment. On top of that, I'm not a big fan of tutors to begin with, so there's that. I appreciate that it's in there to ramp up the crazy from Helm of the Host or Blade of Selves. But honestly, if I can take Nazan and the Hammer of Nazan out, I could add 1 more of each of those.
Yeah. With Commander Legends, we had Armored Sky Hunter come out. I think this would be a good addition for the deck. It's 3 and a white. It's a 3/3 flyer. Creature Cat Knight. Whenever Armored Sky Hunter attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put an aura or equipment card from among them onto the battlefield. If an equipment is put onto the battlefield this way, you may attach it to a creature you control. Put the rest of those cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, it's pretty sweet for a replacement effect or a replacement of Nazan, still keeping to the cat theme, but also, if you have. So the thing here is, if you have Blade of Selves or Helm of the Host is the thing. You've already gone past attack, so it's not super helpful in that combat, but you just got it for free. So it's great. And then obviously if you use it if you find Hammer and Nazan, then anytime you play a equipment, it attaches, because that's what that card does.
Yeah, and that would it also assists because I only have 2 flying cats, and that's just there's a handful of games when that just when it's been demonstrated pretty clearly that that's not enough. So adding another flying cat knight, I think is a good thing. We keep finding all these cards in Commander Legends, and I've still got 2 boxes of it downstairs that I haven't cracked. And it just gets harder and harder to hang in there.
Definitely. Yeah.
So if you're looking to build this deck, there's a couple of other ones that you can obviously optimize. I think a fourth copy of Shields of Velisvel probably isn't a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it's necessary. I always look at it when I'm building a 60 card casual deck as, if you're putting 4 copies of it in, it means you want it in your opening hand. And I don't necessarily want Shields of Velisvel in my opening hand. It does something when the other cards are in place and ready. Otherwise, your creatures are just getting a bonus on the back end. And that's all it's doing. And a lot of times that's just not enough. Like, that's not what I want. So that's why there's only 3. But, you could run 4. It wouldn't be a horrible thing. The same goes with Altar of Dementia. There's only 3 copies of it in this deck. You probably could go 4 without too much of a downside. But, again, it's a card that I don't necessarily want in the opening hand just because it's not doing anything.
I think as I'm learning more about trying to figure out how many copies of things to put in, I would say 3 is probably the correct number. I think putting in 4 adds in redundancy, so that if you end up drawing one, and the fact is generally nobody's going to remove it unless it's mass removal of artifacts, or if you're really going off with it.
Right.
And so drawing one while one's on the board is a dead card. So I think 3 may be the sweet spot. I also found another maybe a possible one of in this deck because it has red in it. But in M21, there was a big dog cat theme thing. Rin and Seri Inseparable. 1 red, green, white. So it does add red, which is a little bit more prohibitive. It's a 4/4, and it says whenever you cast a dog spell, create a 1/1 green cat creature token, which generally not going to happen. Whenever you cast a cat spell, create a 1/1 white dog creature token, which I guess I'll finish the card first. Red, green, white, tap, Ren and Seri Inseparable deals damage to any target equal to the number of dogs you control. You gain life equal to the number of cats you control, which, as you may have noticed, we don't really have many dogs in this deck, but
unless we have all of them.
Exactly, unless they're all dog, rat, cat creatures. So just an interesting thing. This card is a little bit more on the expensive side in terms of price, but I think it could do a cool thing if you've got one.
Part of the ramp package includes 2 copies of Gaia's Bounty. A lot of people would say no to this card because it doesn't put a land into play. It doesn't put it onto the battlefield. All it does is it finds 2 forests. And I only have 1 copy of Nature's Lore, and people would say, look, if that's where you want to go, then do use 3 copies of Nature's Lore. Yes and no. I'm not looking to ramp huge with this deck, but what I did run was 4 copies of Canopy Vista, and Canopy Vista is a forest plains. So it means Gaia's Bounty is almost always going to find a Canopy Vista. There's also 2 Temple Gardens, so it can find a Temple Garden as well. So there are plenty of forest plains out in this deck. And Sapseed Forest, Yeah.
I would almost say run, like, Gaia's Touch has been one of my favorite cards recently that I've been looking at. It's a green enchantment, and you may put an additional land into play during each of your turns, but it has to be specifically a basic forest, which obviously there's only like 7 in this deck. So maybe this isn't the right place for it, but your first one doesn't have to be a basic forest.
Yeah.
And you can always, it has a second line of text, which is sacrifice this enchantment to add 2 green, in case you need that boost. Or if you've just run out of forests to play, then it gives you that extra little, it gives you, you're recycling your green mana. You're getting it back from when you played it the first time.
So but I mean, that was the reason it's there. you can definitely improve the ramp. I mean, you can improve the ramp package. Just run 3 copies of Cultivate instead of the Bounty and the Lore, and go and find a plains and a forest, and then you're getting both of the mana that you need. So it's not. Again, this is not an optimal setup. I think it was more a case of, ooh, I found this card. I haven't played it. Let me try this. And it's working well enough that
it's working great, honestly.
So,
there's very little I would change about this deck. I mean, we've already talked about what we would, but I think overall this deck holds its own fairly well, and it's so fun to watch happen, and like, I mean, I love the ramp package because I feel like, especially ramp packages in a lot of decks that I see end up being very homogenous. There's always this talk about Commander specifically becoming a homogenous format. Obviously, we're dealing with a 60 card deck here, which honestly you'd think would probably make that ramp package a little bit more homogenous in terms of these cards are clearly the best ramp cards. So now you can have 4 copies of 2 of them or whatever. So I always love looking at ramp packages in 60 card decks to see what little things people change to make it suit their deck better. I mean, Mirari's Wake, you obviously, these cards you clearly chose because you had them.
Right.
You looked at your green cards, and you looked at your white cards, and were like, all right, got some ramp. Done. Yeah. You didn't overthink it. You didn't think about optimizing it. You just chose them because they were sitting there. And I mean, Gaia's Bounty doesn't get a lot of play. And so seeing how it would work in a deck before discounting it is just always nice to see.
Right.
Anything else you want to say about this deck before we wrap it up?
As bizarre as it is, because this is one of my newer decks, it really hasn't been touched since 2019. So feel free to go back through the last 2 years of cards. You're going to find cards that could comfortably go in this deck. You're also going to find other cards that, when you ask yourself, well, why wouldn't you put that in there? I mean, Brimaz is not in here. He makes cats. They could easily be sacked to the altar, just like a lot of the other cards that are in here. But he's not. This is a deck that has a few key components, and then I think the rest of it is sort of up to your imagination, however you want to make it work. I encourage you to check out what's out there and mess around with it a little bit. I think the Hungry Lynx and Shields of Velasvel all by themselves, or even just the Hungry Lynx and a Mirror Entity, it works. It works when you want it. So, give it a shot. And build around it. I mean,
it's the heart of this deck.
Yeah,
and it's. I mean, if anything, it's the immovable part of this deck. Everything else is
can
fair game.
Go. It can come and go.
And we would love to see what any of you could build around this specific, I guess, for a lack of a better term, combo. I mean, they're synergized. They've got a synergy between them that really works very well, and we'd love to see what any of you could do with it.
Right.
Anyway, I think that's gonna do it for us today. Give all your cats a little scritch on the head for me, and send us all your favorite cat pictures. We'd love to see them. But we're Temple of False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our cats sure as heck are fun. Thank you so much for listening. Meow 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 meow
meow
meow meow meow meow. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Andy.
I'm Bruce.
Thank you again. May your fifth land be the temple.
No!
Wait. Before you go, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. You can reach out to us via email at falsepodmtg @gmail.com, or on Twitter @FalsePodMTG. Bruce is @ManaBurned, and I'm @AndyWeekend, though you'll definitely notice I use the podcast Twitter far more often. Now that we've got you here, make sure you subscribe, like, rate us on whatever podcast platform you use. It helps us out. It gets us more reach. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Like a video there. Leave some comments for more casual enjoyment. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with some more timeless discussions about all things casual. So come hang out, and may your 5th land be the temple. Bye-bye. Should I do my best, Bruce? Bye!